Row 23 could hear everything. The baby's screams pierced through the cabin at 30,000 feet, raw and relentless, while a billionaire in first class held her child with hands that built empires, but couldn't calm a single cry. The nanny tried. Failed. Flight attendants hovered. Nothing worked. Then a man in economy stood up. His jacket was frayed at the edges. His shoes were worn. His hands were calloused from work nobody in first class would ever do. He walked down that aisle like he was walking toward his own child, pushed past the protests, and opened his mouth. What came out wasn't advice. It wasn't judgment. It was a song nobody had ever heard before, rough and raw and real. The baby went silent. The billionaire stared. And in that moment, 3 lives collided in a way that would crack them all open. What happened next didn't just end the crying. It revealed what money can't buy and what poverty can't take away. Russell Hayes had never been on a plane before. 42 years old, and this was his first time leaving the ground, watching the tarmac shrink beneath him through a scratched window in seat 23B. His hands gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles went white, and he told himself to breathe, to think about why he was here. The job interview. The one chance that could change everything for him and his daughter. The opportunity that made him leave Peyton with Mrs. Chen next door, the 70-year-old widow who'd never watched a child overnight before, but insisted she could handle it. He'd left his number written on 3 different pieces of paper throughout the apartment, kissed his daughter's forehead 4 times, and promised he'd be back tomorrow night with good news. The plane leveled off and Russell finally loosened his grip. He pulled out his phone, looked at the photo of Peyton on his lock screen. 7 years old, with gap-toothed smile and wild curls she got from her mother. Rachel had been gone 5 years now, complications during childbirth that the doctor said they couldn't have predicted. Sometimes Russell still woke up reaching for her side of the bed, forgetting for just a second that he was alone in this, that every decision, every meal, every nightmare and fever and parent-teacher conference fell on him, and him alone. He worked 3 jobs to keep their heads above water: morning shift at the warehouse, afternoons doing maintenance at the community center, nights building furniture in the garage when Peyton was asleep. It wasn't enough, but it was all he had. This interview was different. A real position with benefits and salary. The kind of job that meant he could actually be home for dinner every night. The kind that meant Peyton wouldn't have to wear hand-me-downs or pretend she wasn't hungry when the grocery money ran short at the end of the month. He'd practiced his answers for 2 weeks, borrowed a tie from his neighbor, and used his last bit of savings for this plane ticket. Everything was riding on tomorrow morning. Everything had to go right. That's when he heard it. A baby's cry from first class, thin and desperate at first, then building into full-throated screams that seemed to fill every corner of the cabin. Russell winced. He knew that sound. The tired cry, the one that meant nothing was working, and everyone was at the end of their rope. Around him, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered something about parents who can't control their kids. Russell felt his jaw tighten. People who'd never spent 3 hours walking circles around a living room at 2 in the morning, singing the same song on repeat until their voice went hoarse, had no right to judge. The crying continued. 10 minutes. 15. Russell tried to focus on his notes, the answers he'd rehearsed, but the sound cut through everything. He closed his eyes, and he was back in his apartment, Peyton 3 months old and burning with fever. Russell panicking because he couldn't afford the emergency room copay. He'd held her against his chest and sang to her, made up words to a melody his own father had hummed when Russell was small. Nonsense lyrics about stars and moonbeams and little girls who were braver than they knew. And Peyton had quieted, her small hand curling around his finger, her breathing evening out against his heartbeat. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the speaker, apologizing for the disturbance, asking for patience. Russell looked toward first class, but couldn't see past the curtain. The crying grew more frantic. A woman's voice, tight with stress, trying to soothe. The nanny probably, or maybe the mother herself. Nothing was working. Passengers were getting restless, throwing looks toward the front of the plane, making comments loud enough to carry. Russell felt something twist in his chest. That baby needed help. That mother needed help. And he knew in his bones that he could calm that child. But he was nobody. A guy in economy wearing a borrowed tie and shoes, he'd resoled himself because he couldn't afford new ones. What right did he have to walk up to first class, to insert himself into a stranger's crisis? They'd probably call security. They'd definitely judge him. A middle-aged man with rough hands and discount store clothes offering to touch a billionaire's baby. He could already imagine the looks, the suspicion, the immediate no. Russell sat frozen, the war inside him playing out in silence. The baby screamed, his heart hammered. Every instinct he had as a father told him to move, to help. But every experience he'd had as a poor man in a world that didn't trust poor men told him to stay in his seat. Don't make a scene. Don't draw attention. Don't risk anything when you have so much to lose. Then he thought about Peyton. What he'd want someone to do if she was the one crying and he was the one desperate for help. What he'd already done 100 times over, because being a single father meant swallowing your pride and asking for help even when it hurt. He'd shown up at food banks. He'd let the church pay his electric bill. He'd accepted charity with his head down and his thank yous quiet, because keeping Peyton fed and safe mattered more than his ego. Russell unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. His hands were shaking, but his feet were moving, carrying him down the aisle toward first class. A flight attendant stepped into his path, professional smile already forming into a polite refusal. But Russell looked past her to where a woman sat holding a red-faced infant. The woman's suit probably cost more than Russell's monthly rent. Her hair was perfect even in distress. Her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. "I can help," Russell said, his voice rougher than he intended. The flight attendant opened her mouth to protest, but the woman looked up, and something in her expression stopped everyone cold. It was desperation, pure and simple and human. The kind that had nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with being at the absolute end of what you could handle. "Please," the woman said. Just that one word, but it carried the weight of hours of trying and failing. The flight attendant stepped aside. Russell moved closer, and the nanny shifted protectively, but the woman held up her hand. She was studying Russell's face, and he met her eyes steady. Let her see him. Let her decide. "What's the baby's name?" Russell asked. "Christopher," the woman said. "He's 8 months old. He won't stop crying. Nothing works. The bottle, the pacifier, nothing." Her voice cracked on the last word. Russell nodded. He'd been there. God, he'd been there. "May I?" He held out his hands. Those calloused, working hands that had held his daughter through every hurt and fear she'd ever known. The woman hesitated for only a second, then passed Christopher over. The baby's screams didn't stop, his small body rigid with distress. Russell settled the child against his chest, one hand supporting the head, the other firm on his back. He started to sway, gentle and rhythmic, the same motion that had carried Peyton through countless difficult nights. Then he opened his mouth and sang, not a lullaby from a book or a song from the radio. The same made-up melody he'd sung to his daughter. The one about stars and moonbeams and being braver than you knew. His voice was rough from years of warehouse dust and not enough sleep, but it was steady. Real. He sang about little boys who flew higher than clouds, who had whole worlds waiting for them, who were loved beyond measure even when things felt hard. Christopher's screams faltered, hiccuped. The baby's fists unclenched slightly, and Russell kept singing, kept swaying, kept being the steady presence that said everything would be okay. Around them, the cabin had gone silent. Passengers were watching, but Russell didn't care. He was locked into this moment, this child, this small act of comfort that was the only thing he'd ever been truly good at. Being a father. Being present. Being there. The baby went quiet. His breathing evened out. Small fingers gripped Russell's shirt and held on. Russell looked down at Christopher's face, saw the exhaustion there, and kept humming softly. The woman was staring at him like he'd just performed a miracle. The nanny had tears in her eyes. Russell just smiled, tired and real. "How did you do that?" the woman whispered. "Practice," Russell said. "I have a daughter, 7 years old. I've sung her to sleep about 1,000 times." He kept rocking gently, not wanting to disturb Christopher's fragile peace. Sometimes they just need to know someone's got them, that they're safe. The woman nodded slowly. She looked at Russell like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. Not his cheap clothes or his worn shoes, but something deeper. "I'm Veronica Ashford," she said, "and I'm a terrible mother." The words came out flat. Factual, painful. "No," Russell said immediately. "You're a tired mother. There's a difference." He glanced at the nanny, who was wiping her eyes with a tissue. "We all need help sometimes. That doesn't make you terrible. That makes you human." Something shifted in Veronica's expression. She gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Would you mind staying, just until we land?" There was no command in it, no expectation of obedience, just a request, person to person. Russell thought about his seat and economy, his interview notes, his plan to use the flight time to prepare. Then he looked at the sleeping baby in his arms and nodded. He sat down carefully, keeping Christopher settled against his chest. The nanny excused herself, giving them space. Veronica was quiet for a long moment, studying Russell's face. "Tell me about your daughter," she finally said. So Russell did. He told her about Peyton's gap-toothed smile and her obsession with astronomy, how she could name every planet and half the constellations, even though they'd never been able to afford a telescope. He told her about the wooden toys he carved in the garage at night, how he'd taught himself from library books because store-bought toys were expensive, and he liked making things that lasted. He told her about Rachel, and how losing her had been like losing his map to the world, but Peyton had become his new North Star. Everything he did, every choice he made, was about giving his daughter the life she deserved. Veronica listened without interrupting. When Russell finished, she was quiet again, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest. "I built a tech empire," she said finally. 40 under 40 lists, magazine covers, the whole thing. I thought I could handle a baby the same way I handled board meetings. Schedule him, optimize him, delegate when necessary. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Christopher's father left before he was born, said he didn't sign up for this, and I thought, fine, I'll do it alone. I'm Veronica Ashford. I can do anything alone. But you can't, Russell said gently. It wasn't a question. No, Veronica whispered. I can't. I have the nanny, and the night nurse, and the nutritionist, and the developmental specialist. I have every resource money can buy. But Christopher still cries. He still needs something I don't know how to give him. She looked at her son sleeping in Russell's arms. And you gave it to him in 3 minutes. Russell shook his head. I just sang to him, that's all. That's not special. It is to him, Veronica said. She met Russell's eyes, and he saw something there he hadn't expected. Respect. Real, genuine respect from a woman who probably had 50 people working under her. What are you flying to Chicago for? Russell hesitated. Something about this moment felt fragile, like admitting his poverty would break whatever odd connection they'd formed. but he'd never been good at lying. "Job interview," he said. "Tomorrow morning. It's a maintenance supervisor position for a property management company. Better pay than what I'm making now. Benefits. Stable hours." He tried to make it sound impressive, but heard how it fell flat. Maintenance supervisor. To her, it probably sounded like nothing. "What company?" Veronica asked. "Ashford Properties," Russell said. Then froze as his brain caught up to his mouth. "Wait, Ashford? You're not—" "I own it," Veronica said, "along with about 15 other companies. Real estate's just one branch." She was watching him carefully now, and Russell felt his stomach drop. This was it. This was where she'd think he'd planned this whole thing, manipulated his way into her orbit for a job. His face must have shown his panic because Veronica held up a hand. "I didn't know until you said it. This is coincidence. Strange, but coincidence." Russell nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Christopher stirred slightly, and Russell automatically adjusted his hold, hummed a few more bars of the song. The baby settled. Veronica's expression softened as she watched. "That interview tomorrow," she said slowly. "You'll pass it. I'm sure of that now. But I want to offer you something else." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Those wooden toys you make. Do you have photos?" Russell blinked at the subject change. Yeah. On my phone. Peyton posts them on my account sometimes. She thinks they're good enough to sell." He said it with a father's indulgent smile, like it was a sweet dream, but nothing realistic. "Can I see?" Veronica asked. Russell shifted carefully, pulling his phone from his pocket without disturbing Christopher. He pulled up the photos one-handed. Simple wooden animals, puzzle boxes, a rocking horse he'd spent 3 months building. Nothing fancy. No power tools. Just hand-carved patience and whatever scrap wood he could find or afford. He handed the phone to Veronica and waited for the polite dismissal, the kind words that meant nothing. But Veronica scrolled through slowly, stopping on each photo. Her business face was back on, analytical and sharp. "These are beautiful," she said, and it didn't sound like flattery. "The craftsmanship is excellent, and there's something about them, something genuine." She looked up at him. Handmade is a huge market right now. Parents want quality, want things with soul instead of plastic mass production. You could build a business on this. Russell laughed. Couldn't help it. "I work 3 jobs and barely keep the lights on. I don't have capital for a business. I don't have business experience. I don't even have a workshop, just a garage with a space heater." "But you have skill," Veronica said, "and you have something money can't buy. You understand what parents need because you're living it. You make things with love because you're making them for your daughter." She handed his phone back. "I want to invest in you. Help you start a real toy company. Small batch, handmade, marketed to parents who want quality. I'll provide capital, business infrastructure, connections. You provide the craftsmanship and the heart." Russell stared at her. His first thought was that this was a joke. His second was that it was pity. His third was that he should say no, that accepting charity from a billionaire would make him what everyone always assumed poor people were, dependent, lesser, taking handouts. But he looked at Christopher sleeping peacefully in his arms, felt the weight of this small life trusting him completely. He thought about Peyton and the life he wanted for her, and he thought about the wooden toys sitting in his garage, made with hands that knew how to build things that lasted. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe this was just one parent recognizing something real in another parent. "Why?" Russell asked. "Why would you do this?" Veronica was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Because you gave my son something in 3 minutes that all my money couldn't buy in 8 months. Peace. Because when you talked about your daughter, I saw what I'm missing with my son. That connection, that presence. I thought I could hire people to do the emotional work while I ran my empire. But watching you, I realize I'm losing the only thing that actually matters." She looked at Christopher. "You reminded me what success actually looks like, and it's not on a magazine cover." The plane shuddered slightly, hitting turbulence. Christopher woke with a start, face crumpling toward another cry. Russell immediately started humming again, that same simple melody. The baby quieted, looking up at Russell's face with wide eyes. Veronica watched them both, and Russell saw her wipe at her eyes quickly. "I don't know if I can do this," Russell admitted. "Build a business. I barely graduated high school. I don't know anything about marketing or distribution or any of that." "You'll learn," Veronica said. "I'll teach you. We'll hire people for what you can't do yourself. But the core of it, the making and the vision, that's you." She straightened in her seat, and he could see the CEO coming back, the woman who made decisions and moved forward. "Take the supervisor job. Stable income while we build this. But give me 6 months. Let me show you what's possible." Russell looked down at Christopher, who was starting to drift off again. He thought about all the times he'd been told to know his place, to be grateful for scraps, to not reach for things that weren't meant for people like him. He thought about Peyton asking why they couldn't afford the science camp all her friends were going to, and the way she'd smiled and said it was okay when he could see it. Wasn't. Maybe it was time to reach. Maybe it was time to believe that his hands could build more than just a small life. Maybe it was time to let someone help. "Okay," Russell said quietly. 6 months. Let's try." Veronica smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Okay," she echoed. They shook hands over her sleeping son, and Russell felt something shift inside him. Hope. Terrifying and bright and too big to look at directly. But there. The plane landed in Chicago an hour later. Russell handed Christopher back to Veronica carefully, showed her the swaying motion that worked best. She practiced it, awkward at first, then finding the rhythm. Christopher stayed calm in her arms, and Veronica's eyes shone with something that might have been tears, or might have been relief, or might have been both. "Thank you," she whispered to Russell. "Thank you," he said back, and meant it for everything. For seeing him, for believing in him, for reminding him that sometimes help comes from the places you least expect. They exchanged phone numbers. Veronica's nanny reappeared, and Russell gathered his things from economy, his borrowed tie and his worn shoes, and his notes for an interview that suddenly felt different. The other passengers stared as he walked back through the cabin, and he held his head higher than he had in years. But the hope lasted exactly 12 hours. Russell aced the interview the next morning, got the job offer by noon, and was heading back to his hotel room when his phone rang. Mrs. Chen's number. His stomach dropped before he even answered. "Russell," Mrs. Chen's voice was shaking. "Peyton has a fever, a high one. It came on so fast, and she's asking for you, and I don't know what to do." The world tilted. Russell checked his phone. His flight back wasn't until tomorrow morning. He couldn't get home until then, couldn't be there when his daughter needed him. "How high?" he managed. 103.5, Mrs. Chen said. "She's crying." "Russell, I'm scared." He closed his eyes. Saw Peyton small and sick and asking for her daddy who wasn't there. "Take her to the emergency room. I'll call ahead, tell them to bill me. I'm getting on the next flight." He hung up and pulled up flight options with shaking hands. The next flight with seats was in 6 hours. 6 hours of Peyton suffering without him. And the ticket price, the last-minute price, was $340. Russell opened his banking app. $207 in his account. The job didn't start for 2 weeks. He had no credit cards, no savings, nothing. Russell stood in the hotel hallway and felt everything crumble. The business opportunity, the hope, all of it meaningless because he couldn't get to his daughter. Couldn't afford the one thing that mattered. He was going to have to call Mrs. Chen back and tell her to take Peyton to the hospital alone. His 7-year-old daughter would be scared and sick with strangers while he was stuck 300 miles away because he was poor. Because he'd always been poor. Because nothing ever really changed. He sank down against the wall, phone clutched in his hand, and fought against the sob building in his chest. A few hotel guests walked past, gave him uncomfortable looks, kept moving. Russell didn't care. Let them see. Let them judge. None of it mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from Veronica. "How did the interview go?" Russell stared at the message. His pride, what was left of it, screamed at him to say nothing. To handle this alone. To not burden a woman he barely knew with his problems. But his hands were moving, typing before he could stop himself. "Got the job. But my daughter's sick. High fever. I can't get home. Can't afford the flight. I don't know what to do." The response came 30 seconds later. "What airport?" Russell told her. Then, "I'll figure it out. Don't worry about it." The phone rang immediately. Veronica's voice, clipped and efficient. "Check your email. I sent you a ticket confirmation. Direct flight leaving in 90 minutes. Get to the airport now." Russell pulled up his email with shaking hands. The ticket was there. First class, leaving in 90 minutes. "I can't accept this," he said, but his voice broke on the words. "Yes, you can," Veronica said firmly. "You helped my son. Let me help your daughter. This isn't charity, Russell. This is what people do. They help each other." A pause. "I'm a CEO of a property management company, among other things. I've seen 1,000 job interviews. You know what I never saw in any of them? A man who would give up his dream interview to rush home to a sick child. But you would have. You were ready to walk away from everything for Peyton. That's the kind of person I want to invest in. That's the kind of father who builds things that matter." Russell couldn't speak, couldn't breathe right. He just stood there in the hallway with tears running down his face, while Veronica waited patiently on the other end. "Go home to your daughter," she said gently. "And Russell, when she's better, we're starting that business. Not because I feel sorry for you, because I believe in you. There's a difference." The flight home was a blur. Russell spent it staring out the window, his whole body vibrating with the need to be there, to see Peyton, to know she was okay. The plane couldn't move fast enough. When they finally landed, he grabbed his bag and ran through the airport like a man possessed. Mrs. Chen met him at his apartment door. "She's sleeping," the elderly woman whispered. "The fever broke an hour ago. I gave her medicine and cool compresses like you told me. She's okay, Russell. She's okay." Russell almost fell with relief. He thanked Mrs. Chen, handed her the emergency cash he always kept in his wallet, and walked into Peyton's room. She was curled under her blankets, her face flushed, but peaceful. He sat on the edge of her bed and put his hand on her forehead. Still warm, but not dangerously so. As his touch registered, Peyton's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy?" Her voice was small and rough. "I'm here, baby," Russell whispered. "I'm right here." Peyton sat up and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight. Russell held her back, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. This was everything. This was what mattered. "I was scared," Peyton said into his shoulder. "I know. I'm sorry I wasn't here." Russell pulled back just enough to see her face. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Peyton smiled, tired, but real. "Mrs. Chen said you flew on an airplane. Was it scary?" "A little," Russell admitted. "But it was worth it. I got to help someone, and someone helped me." He brushed her curls back from her face. "Pei, how would you feel if Daddy started making those wooden toys for real? Like, as a real business?" Peyton's eyes went wide. "Really? You mean it?" "Maybe," Russell said. "We'd have to work hard, and things would change. But we'd be okay." Better than okay. He thought about Veronica's offer, about the hope he'd felt on the plane. I met someone who believes in us, who wants to help us build something special. Like magic? Peyton asked, and Russell laughed. No, baby, not magic. Just people being good to each other. Sometimes that happens. Peyton yawned and settled back against her pillows. Daddy, will you sing me the Star Song? Russell smiled and started to hum. The same melody he'd sung to Christopher on the plane, the one he'd been singing to Peyton her entire life. She was asleep before he finished the second verse, but he kept singing anyway, because this was what he was good at. Being here, being present, being the father his daughter deserved. The next 6 months were the hardest of Russell's life. He started the supervisor job and threw himself into learning everything about business from Veronica. She set him up with a small workshop space, helped him hire an assistant, taught him about pricing and marketing and inventory management. Russell worked during the day and carved at night, building up stock slowly and carefully. Each piece had to be perfect, had to have soul. Peyton helped him photograph the toys, her eye for angles better than his. She named some of the designs and tested every piece ruthlessly for durability. Kids are rough, Daddy, she said seriously. It has to survive us. Russell laughed and reinforced the joints, made things that would last through childhoods. The other employees at Ashford Properties whispered. Russell heard the rumors that he'd slept his way into Veronica's favor, that he was using her, that the business was just charity for a poor single dad she pitied. The word stung. Russell wanted to quit a dozen times. Wanted to tell Veronica this wasn't worth the judgment, the suspicion, the constant feeling that he didn't belong. But then Peyton would come home from school talking about the science camp she was signed up for next summer, the one they could finally afford. Or he'd finish a rocking horse and know in his bones it was the best work he'd ever done. Or Veronica would send him an email from a parent whose child loved one of his toys, who said it was the only thing their autistic son would play with, that it calmed him in a way nothing else could. Those moments kept him going, kept him carving, kept him believing. 3 months in, Peyton got sick again, bad enough that Russell had to take her to the hospital this time, sit in the emergency room with her small hand in his while doctors ran tests. The bill came to $6,000, even with his new insurance. Russell looked at the number and felt the old panic rising. But Veronica showed up at the hospital with Christopher on her hip. The baby was bigger now, starting to babble. He reached for Russell immediately, and Russell took him, that automatic motion of comfort. Christopher settled against his chest, and Veronica watched them with soft eyes. I heard, she said. Is she okay? Pneumonia, Russell said. They caught it early. She'll be fine. He looked at the paperwork in his hand. I just need to figure out payment plans. Veronica took the papers from him gently. Consider it handled. No, Russell said immediately. Veronica, I can't keep taking from you. The flight, the workshop, now this. I'm not a charity case. You're not, Veronica said firmly. You're my business partner, and you're my friend. Friends help each other, Russell. Let me do this. She softened her voice. You gave Christopher back to me. You showed me how to be present with my son. I hold him now. I sing to him. I'm learning to be the mother he needs instead of the CEO who delegates parenting. That's worth more than $6,000. That's worth everything. Russell looked at Christopher, who was playing with his shirt collar and babbling happily. He thought about that moment on the plane, when he'd stood up despite every instinct telling him to stay in his seat. How that one choice had led to all of this. To hope. To friendship. To a chance at something better. Okay, he said quietly. Thank you. Veronica smiled. You're welcome. Now let's go check on that daughter of yours. I brought her some books. They sat in Peyton's hospital room together, Veronica reading stories, while Russell held Christopher and Peyton dozed between them. The nurses gave them curious looks, but said nothing. Just two parents and their kids, keeping each other company through a hard night. It shouldn't have been revolutionary, but somehow it was. 6 months after that plane ride, Russell stood in a small gallery space in downtown Chicago. Around him were 50 wooden toys, each one handcrafted with care, that showed in every smooth edge and careful joint. The sign above the display read, "Papa's Hands, Toys Built with Love." Local press had covered the story of the single dad turned artisan, the billionaire who believed in handmade quality. Parents lined up to see the collection, to touch the pieces, to understand what made them special. Russell wore a new suit, one that fit properly and wasn't borrowed. Beside him stood Peyton in a dress she'd picked out herself, her gap-toothed smile wide as she explained to visitors how her daddy made each toy. Veronica was there with Christopher, who at 14 months was walking now, stumbling toward Russell with arms outstretched whenever he saw him. Russell had become Uncle Russell, the person who could calm Christopher's tantrums and make him laugh with silly songs. A reporter approached, asked Russell what made his toys different from the hundreds of others on the market. Russell thought about it, choosing his words carefully. "They're made by someone who understands what kids need," he said finally. "Not just entertainment, but comfort, security, something that says they're loved and valued. Every toy I make thinking about my daughter, about what I'd want her to have. That's the difference." The reporter nodded, scribbled notes. "And your partnership with Veronica Ashford? How did that come about?" Russell glanced at Veronica, who was helping Christopher stack wooden blocks. She looked up and caught his eye, smiled. "I sang to her son on an airplane," Russell said, "and she saw something in that. Saw that maybe the things we make matter less than why we make them." It was a good answer, a simple answer. But it held the weight of everything that had happened. The fear and the hope and the moments when everything could have gone differently. When he could have stayed in his seat. When he could have said no to help. When pride could have won over need. The launch event was a success. Pre-orders flooded in, more than Russell had dared to imagine. He'd need to hire help, expand the workshop, commit fully to this new path. It was terrifying. But standing there with Peyton's hand in his, and Veronica's friendship steady beside him, Russell felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, certainty, that they were going to be okay. Better than okay. That night, after the gallery closed and the visitors left, Russell took Peyton home to their apartment. It was the same small space they'd always lived in, but it felt different now. Lighter. The wooden toys on her shelf weren't just Daddy's hobby anymore. They were a business, a future, a real, tangible future. Peyton brushed her teeth and climbed into bed, and Russell sat on the edge like he did every night. "Daddy," she said, "are we rich now?" Russell laughed. "No, baby, we're not rich, but we're stable. We're safe, and that's pretty close." "Good," Peyton said. "I don't need to be rich, I just need you." She yawned. "Will you sing the star song?" Russell smiled and started to hum, that same simple melody he'd sung to her since she was born. The one that had calmed a billionaire's baby at 30,000 feet and changed the course of 3 lives. It wasn't a special song. It wasn't complex or beautiful. It was just honest, just real. Just a father singing to his child about love that didn't depend on money or status or anything but being there. Peyton fell asleep with a smile on her face. Russell kissed her forehead and stood to leave, but paused in the doorway. He looked back at his daughter, at this small person who was his entire world, and felt gratitude wash over him. For Mrs. Chen, who'd watched Peyton when he had to fly. For Veronica, who'd seen worth in a stranger's kindness. For Christopher, who'd needed comfort only Russell could give. For every person who'd helped when they didn't have to, who'd chosen connection over judgment. And for himself. For standing up on that plane despite the fear. For believing he had something to offer even when the world told him he didn't. For being the father Peyton needed, even when it meant accepting help. Even when it meant letting go of pride. Russell turned off the light and walked to his own room. Tomorrow he'd start working on new designs. Tomorrow he'd train the assistant Veronica was sending over. Tomorrow he'd keep building the business that was built on nothing but love and skill and the belief that everyone deserved beauty in their lives. But tonight, he just stood at his window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was Veronica, probably singing Christopher to sleep with the techniques Russell had taught her. Somewhere out there were the families who'd bought his toys, children falling asleep holding wooden animals carved with care. Somewhere out there was the life he'd been too afraid to reach for, now close enough to touch. A plane flew overhead, lights blinking in the darkness. Russell watched it until it disappeared into the clouds. 6 months ago, he'd been on a plane for the first time, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. He'd had no idea what would happen when he stood up and walked down that aisle. No idea that one song would lead to all of this, but he'd done it anyway, and that made all the difference. Russell smiled and closed the curtain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new moments of doubt. But tonight, he and Peyton were safe. They were together. They were building something that mattered. And sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, that was everything. He climbed into bed and closed his eyes. In his mind, he could still hear the echo of that plane ride, Christopher's cries giving way to peaceful breathing, Veronica's expression changing from desperation to hope. He could feel the weight of the baby in his arms and the weight of possibility opening up before him. Money couldn't buy those moments. Poverty couldn't take them away. They existed in the space between people, in the choice to help even when you had nothing, in the willingness to accept help even when it hurt your pride. They existed in a song hummed in the darkness, in calloused hands building something beautiful, in a father's love that never wavered no matter how hard things got. Russell had learned something on that plane, that the things we build with our hands matter less than the connections we build with our hearts, that reaching out when you're scared is the bravest thing you can do, that sometimes the person you help and the person who helps you are the same person, just in different moments. And as he drifted off to sleep, Russell heard his daughter's voice from her room, sleep-talking the way she sometimes did. "Love you, Daddy," she murmured into the darkness. "Love you too, baby," Russell whispered back, knowing she wouldn't hear, but saying it anyway. Because that was what you did. You showed up. You spoke the words. You built the life piece by piece, with patience and care, and hands that refused to give up. The wooden toys in his workshop would last for generations. They were built to endure, to be handed down from parent to child to grandchild. But the real legacy wasn't in the wood or the craftsmanship. It was in the lesson they taught. That everyone deserves beauty. That hard work has worth. That kindness matters more than money. That a father's love, given freely and without condition, could change the world, one small gesture at a time. On a plane 6 months ago, Russell Hayes had stood up and done the unthinkable. He'd believed he had something to offer. He'd reached across the divide of class and status and offered comfort to a stranger's child. And in that moment, everything changed. Not because of money or opportunity or business plans, but because of the simple truth that humans need each other, that we're all just doing our best, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you struggle and let them help. Russell slept deeply that night, and in the morning, He'd wake up and keep building, keep carving, keep showing Peyton that their worth wasn't measured by their bank account, but by the love they put into the world. But for now, he rested. A father who'd found his way home, a craftsman who'd found his calling. A man who'd learned that the unthinkable thing wasn't singing to a stranger's baby. It was believing he deserved good things too.